The midday heat was replaced by a slight coolness. The western sky darkened and frowned. Everything froze in anticipation of the impending rain. The rumble of thunder could already be heard in the distance. The villagers looked fearfully and happily at the sky at the same time and hurried to finish their work in the courtyard, otherwise it would start pouring. Only a young girl in the vegetable garden continued to squat on the potatoes as if nothing had happened. She had her thin tights rolled up above her knees, a scarf over her wavy blonde hair, and she was humming something as she methodically swung the trowel. "Masha, why don't you run home?" called her neighbor, Grandfather Ivan. "Look, the sky is so black, there's already lightning on the lake." Then there was a deafening bang, a rumble. A fiery arrow shot out, and the old man waved his hand and almost trotted towards his house, which meandered along a narrow path between two vegetable gardens. No matter how long you've lived in the world, it's scary when it rumbles like that. Masha also cowered in fear, squeezed her eyes shut, sighed heavily and walked slowly home. The first heavy raindrops fell, then more and more frequently. Streams of water ran over Masha's hair and face, and no one would have noticed that it wasn't just the rain that was making Masha's face wet. She cried, and the closer she got to the house, the harder she cried. She froze a little on the threshold, sighed and stepped inside. "Oh, there she is." When she saw the girl, a thin woman, who was clearly overweight, said sullenly, "Have you had time to weed the potatoes yet?" "Not much," Masha replied curtly, quickly washed her face and ducked into her room, changed her clothes and climbed under the covers onto the bed. She warmed herself and her eyes closed of their own accord. Soon she fell asleep, and even the thunderstorm was nothing to her. "Did you dream, Masha, that she was back with Mom and Dad in their beautiful house by the river? She is about 5 years old." Dad throws her up and up. Masha laughs. Mom shouts something like "careful" to Dad and smiles herself. Mom is holding a tray of sandwiches. Umka, the Snow-White Spitz, the family favorite, spins underfoot. Then they all jump into the car, including Umka, and drive into town. And everything flashes in their eyes, and then one, and a voice. "Girl, are you alive? Wake up." Masha shuddered, whether from sleep or from another heavenly rumble. Yes, it was 10 years ago that her parents died in an accident. Masha was with them. She was very lucky to have been thrown out of the car and survived. Mom, Dad and Umka, the family pet, were burned to death in a car explosion. They were run over by a Kamaz truck. The family was wealthy, and Masha immediately found loving and caring caregivers. But just a month after her parents' funeral, it turned out that all the money from the company's accounts had magically disappeared somewhere. The house and property was suddenly seized by the banks because of debts, and Masha was suddenly no longer needed by anyone. And she found herself in the most basic orphanage, all alone. Then Aunt Sveta and Uncle Vasya appeared, smiled, stroked her head, and said that they were now a family. Only later, when Masha grew up a little, did she realize that she had only been taken into this house because of the payments orphans were entitled to. But back then, as a 7-year-old child, she wanted family warmth and care. But of course, she got none of that here. Only cries and admonitions that she was an orphan and should be grateful to us. But when the inspectors came, Aunt Sveta and Uncle Vasya became the most caring parents in the world. They dressed Masha in the best dress they had bought for their own daughter Nastya. Masha immediately moved into Nastya's bright and spacious room, where there were so many lovely toys. And there was a computer, from which the teachers told the inspectors how happy and cheerful Masha was in her family. All this was only temporary, of course, and Masha smiled and nodded, because Aunt Sveta had told her that if she dared to make any noise, she would take her to an orphanage where she would have room. And Masha didn't want to go there. That was even worse. It was better to live in a small room with old furniture that looked more like a storeroom and to wear rags than to endure the beatings of the older boys in an orphanage. And when Masha grew up, her guardians began to shower her with work. From the age of 10, she weeded the vegetable garden, cleaned the house, and helped her stepfather in the barn. Even with Nastya, the world did not accept her. The native daughter constantly wanted to insult and humiliate the adopted girl. Masha often cried. And it's been a year since Nastya went to the city to study. I could breathe a sigh of relief, and the guardians would pay more attention to her. Maybe they would even love her. But they didn't. They started drinking and went on more and more binges. Masha kept going outside to avoid them, like this time. "What's wrong, Mare?" Svetlana looked into the room. "Run into the vegetable garden and pick some radishes. And Sveta, it's already raining there. You're not sugar, you won't melt." Svetlana looked at Masha in such a way that she understood everything without words. It was better not to argue. After all, there were times when they raised their hands against her, but she put up with everything because she was sure that things would only get worse at the orphanage. So she obeyed all orders, and this time she waited for a thunderstorm and ran into the vegetable garden to pick radishes to bring to her teachers as a snack. But then something unusual happened. Her younger brother came to visit Svetlana. He had been to the colony, and here, as they called it, he was on the run. He had come to see his sister and had his eye on Masha. And the girl was only 16. She was beautiful, her eyes were big and blue, her hair was light, wavy and slender like a twig. One evening, when Svetlana and Vasily had drunk themselves into a stupor, Grishka, Svetlana's brother, looked into Masha's room. The girl was reading a book, and he closed the door and, "Tio Masha." The girl trembled with fear and shyness when he touched her shoulder with his hand with the dirty nails. His fingers were all tattooed. Masha cried out and began to struggle. She didn't even understand how she managed to jump out of the room. Grishka rushed after her, cursing. Svetlana was sitting in the kitchen, mumbling something incoherent and smiling stupidly. Vasily was generally asleep here at the table. "Save a little, Sveta," Masha exclaimed desperately. But the guard only replied with a hiccup and waved her hand. "Hammer, net." Masha ran out of the house, Grishka running after her. The girl stumbled over the gate and fell down. This horrible man was bending over her. Masha covered her eyes. "Hey, you, don't touch the girl." She suddenly heard an unfamiliar male voice. Nearby on the path stood a young guy with an air rifle in his hand. Without thinking twice, the guy pointed it at Grigory. Come on, Grishka muttered. "I'm just. And with drooping shoulders, he turned towards the house. And Masha remained sitting at the gate, crying. "What's wrong?" the boy asked. "Is it your father?" "Oh, no," Masha exclaimed. "I have no parents. I live with my guardians, and that's a relative of theirs, all drunk." "And who are you?" "I've never seen you here before. I only arrived at my grandmother's today. I was out in the country practicing my marksmanship." "At Sparrow's?" Masha asked disparagingly, rubbing her bruised knee. "Really?" laughed the stranger. "On tin cans, of course. Why are you rubbing your knee? Does it hurt?" "It hurts," the girl admitted. "Well, let me see. But don't worry, I'm a trainee doctor. I've already done my first year of university. Give me the button." "I'm not a button. I'm Masha." The girl took offense, but took her palm away from her knee. "And I'm Dima." The guy smiled and immediately became serious. "Listen, well, of course it's not a fracture, but the socket is fine. We'll have to treat it. There's a first aid kit in the house." "I'm not going in there," Masha said quickly. "I'd rather sleep outside than in there." Dima nodded in agreement. The guy still watching them from the window was giving him a hard time, too. The guy suggested they go to his grandmother's house. "She lives over there in the house with the green shutters." "So Baba Valia is your grandmother?" Masha was surprised. "And why didn't you come here earlier?" "I traveled abroad with my parents for 10 years. My father is a diplomat, so we lived in Asia, then in Europe and even in Africa for a year. Can you imagine? Africa is interesting. Everywhere is interesting and everywhere you can live. But you know what I realized? There is nothing better than our country. Of course, my parents wanted me to study in London, but I chose a Russian university and I don't regret that at all." So while they were talking, they reached Dima's grandmother's house. Or rather, Masha reached it. Baba Valia saw Masha and slapped her hands. Poor girl, how she hurt her leg. While Dima tended to the wound, Masha let out a soft cry and Baba Valia ran into the kitchen. From there came the clink of cups. The kettle on the stove rumbled. "It's nice here." Masha felt like she was enveloped in the calm, friendly atmosphere of the house. "How cozy, bright and peaceful it is here. Guys, let's go and have tea," Baba Valia called out. And now the three of them are sitting at the table, drinking tea and eating apple pie. Baba Valia says something and smiles. Dima also talks non-stop. "Does it really happen like that?" Is it possible to just sit there and chat without anyone shouting at you or insulting you? It was a bit unusual for Masha. So, my dear, at some point Baba Valia changed the topic of conversation. Now we have to think about what to do with you. I don't know what to do with myself, Masha admitted bitterly. But I'm not going home. Don't think I'm leaving now. I'll spend the night on a bench, and in the morning I'll go to the district centre for guardianship. I'd rather be taken back to the orphanage than live the way I've lived all these years. Masha cried. Baba Valia hugged the girl, stroked her shoulders and soothed her. You'll be fine. We'll cry, she judged. You won't go on a bench. I'll make you a bed in the hallway. And you talk a lot about the orphanage. It's high time Svetka and Vaska were put in their place. For how many years they abused that girl? How do you know that? Masha was surprised because she had never complained to anyone before. We all know each other. We knew that Svetka had taken you for the sake of the payments and that your money was and still is being spent on Nastya. Grandmother, if you knew, why didn't you say anything? Dima was indignant. And this, Demoshka, is a village. Here, everyone knows everything about everyone else, but you don't interfere in their affairs. But now things are different. This Grishka seems to have decided to settle down here. There will be no life for you, Masha. Go to the guardianship. That would be even better than turning that bastard into the police. But I wouldn't advise you to get involved. He's a criminal. Let her live on her own. And you won't get lost in an orphanage. And who told you it was bad there? As far as I know, they've taken great care of the children there in recent years. I lived there. I know it. Masha snorted. When was that? Everything's different now. And you're an adult. Can you stand up for yourself? Baba placated Valia and poured tea. What a delicious herbal tea she has. It smells like thyme. And strawberry jam, fresh, with foam. And Dima told interesting stories, all kinds of fairy tales. It was so interesting to listen to him. And he smiled so often. His smile made Masha blush a little, even though she didn't know why. Masha gradually came to her senses and her knee was almost pain-free. Why was she so worried? Well, there were other people living in the orphanage. Outside the window, the moon was already rising when everyone in Baba Valia's house finally went to bed. Masha snuggled into a soft, huge feather pillow and thought about what would happen tomorrow, whether her life would be different tomorrow. In the morning, she went to the district centre with Dima. The bus was just passing the guardian's house when Svetlana ran out of the gate, dishevelled and worried. Masha, who saw her through the window, squeezed into the seat. It's all right. They won't hurt you anymore. Dima understood without words and gently touched Masha's arm. I'm with you, Button. Button. At first, Masha took offence at this form of address, but now she was even happy about it. It sounded kind of caring. In principle, Dima was the first person to show such care in many years. I'm not going to leave you now, he said, if they're already on their way to the care centre. I'll find out where they've put you and visit you. Do you think they won't leave me to the guardians? Masha asked anxiously. I'm sure I'll tell them everything I saw yesterday. I'll also tell them that I'll go to the police if they give you back. Let them get away with it however they want. Of course Masha was not returned. The head of the guardianship office turned red when Masha told her how she had lived all those years. Then the woman called the inspector, who had been watching the foster family and had already scolded them without Masha being present. Although you could even hear the inspector threatening to sack the negligent employee in the corridor. It is necessary. For so many years, the girl lived in constant stress and no one cared. Then Svetlana was called for guardianship, but Masha never saw her again. One day later, she was already in the orphanage. So at the age of 16, a new phase of her life began. Masha thought in vain that she would be abused here. No, it was a pretty decent orphanage. A 2-story stone building on the outskirts of the city. It became a home for the unfortunate girl. For Masha, who had grown up in this town until she was 5 years old and then uprooted to other circumstances, everything seemed new, strange. She listened to the street noise, looked at the lanterns shining desperately in the windows of her new room. Yes, a new life had begun. What was next? There were 3 other girls living in the room with Masha, Lena, Kotya and Polina. Masha made friends with the red-haired and overweight Polina in particular. She was also 16 and had spent most of her life in the orphanage. And my mother left me here herself, Polina told her calmly. How is that? All by herself. She took me by the hand. She's an alcoholic. Did your parents drink too? No, they died. I don't have any relatives. I'm sorry about that. Polina reflected that parents who drink are bad, but it's good to have them. But it was impossible to be all alone in the world. And I'm not alone. Masha confessed to her once. I have a friend like that. And told her about Dima. He visited the girl several times, as promised, after Masha had been sent to the orphanage. Once he even brought cake. Baba Valia gave it to him, and spoiled her with chocolates too. Masha was embarrassed and refused. Take and eat. Dima insisted. I'm responsible for you, Button. Masha only blushed in response. Button. Masha liked it so much when he called her that. Dima became her friend and even more. He was constantly in her thoughts. But she didn't talk about it with anyone, not even Polina. She fell in love with Dima, secretly and irrevocably. Although Pauline noticed how Masha's face changed when it came to her boyfriend. Oh, Masha, you've fallen in love with that major. Polina smiled mischievously. You blossom when he comes to visit. I'm not in love with anything. Masha waved it off. He's just a good man. He's my friend. Oh, a boyfriend? But look, Masha, so that this boyfriend doesn't completely turn your head, you mustn't think about him. Why? Mash, well, he's not part of our circle. You can see he's rich. He has brand name clothes. Sweets aren't cheap. It's nothing to him. But it means a lot to us. Mash, such people like your Dima pretend to be nice, but in reality, in general, keep a distance with him. You say that so wisely, Auntie. Wise from experience, laughed Masha. I'm not an aunt, and I don't have much experience, but I remember when my mother got involved with a rich man. My mother and father divorced because of it, and the rich man used her and left her. She started drinking after that. Polina, Dima is different, Masha replied confidently. Polina just grinned. And then Dima disappeared. He stopped coming, stopped writing. Masha was very worried about what might have happened, but Polina told her to forget it. I told her it was nothing. It's good that he's out of there now. The time at the orphanage flew by and now Masha is a graduate. She got a room in the dormitory. She went to sewing school. That was it. Hello, adult life. They lived nearby with Polina and studied together. The friends rushed to the dormitory after their studies and sometimes went for a walk in their free time. Once, when Masha was walking in the park, she suddenly heard a familiar voice. Button. She turned around. Dima was hurrying towards her. He had grown up this year, matured, handsome. When Masha saw him, she was stunned and her heart began to pound. She thought it was all in the past, all her feelings for Dima. But no, as soon as he appeared, her soul sang. Dimka, she exclaimed joyfully. Wow, where have you been all year? And Masha, who hadn't expected anything like this from herself, threw herself at the man. Dima was also happy to see her. He laughed, hugged her and then gave her a pat on the cheek. Masha was embarrassed, lowered her eyes and blushed. Then she dared and looked at the man attentively. Where have you been? How? Where? Didn't Pauline give you a letter? I visited you a year ago, before I left, and you were in class. Polina told me about it. She was in your square in front of the orphanage. So I gave her the letter. Masha stared at her friend, who had been standing on the sidelines the whole time, stunned. When she heard Dima's words, she was a little embarrassed, but she immediately made off, saying that she had put the letter on the bench and the little children had grabbed it and torn it up. She didn't say anything to Masha so that she wouldn't get upset. Pauline, you should have told me anyway, replied Masha reproachfully. Her friend just pursed her lips and walked away. She's lying. Dima was indignant. She made up an excuse on the spur of the moment. All right, I'll talk to her later, sighed Masha. You'd better tell me what was in that letter. I warned you that I had to leave urgently. Then my mother had a crazy accident. She broke her leg abroad. She didn't want to come here. It was a compound fracture. The doctors said it would take months to heal. Dad is always at work. The housekeeper and the nurse come by, of course, but she needs company, you know. So she was cranky. But she's my mother. So I had to go to London with the Acadams. Today I came back, and I came straight to you. I've missed you. I missed you too, Masha whispered softly. They looked into each other's eyes and their lips drew closer together. It was the first real kiss in all the years they had been together. Then they spent the whole evening walking in the park, sitting in cafes, driving through the city in Dima's car. They kissed each other. The young people realized that they didn't need anyone else in this world. It's just him and her. And it was true love. Late in the evening, Masha returned to the hostel with a huge bouquet of roses. Polina saw her in the corridor, snorted and hurried to her room, but Masha blocked her way. "Explain to me," she demanded, "why you kept the letter from me." "Screw you," Pauline suddenly replied angrily. "I don't need to explain anything to you. Your Vimishka has come to you, and be happy. But you'll see, he'll leave you anyway. Not because of you." Masha grinned. "Polina, are you jealous of me? If only you were jealous." Pauline snarled and went into her room, pushing Masha away. On the threshold, she turned around and shouted angrily, "Have you decided that you're better than me? Do rich boys fall in love with you? He'll take advantage of you and leave you. He will." And she went into the room and slammed the door. And Masha stood there a little stunned. All this time she had thought Polina was a real friend, and now her true face was suddenly revealed. So much anger, jealousy and resentment. And what is Masha to blame for? For falling in love and being loved. Masha was hurt by what her friend had done, but she decided not to think about it anymore. Pauline has made her choice, doesn't want to communicate and doesn't need to. From that evening onwards, the friends became like strangers. They no longer even greeted each other. After all, they lived in the same neighborhood. But communicating with Dima dulled the pain of losing her friend. Yes, Dima became the most important person in Masha's life. After her studies, the girl looked forward to meeting her lover. Dima, who had been recovering at university, was catching up on the material he had missed and therefore could not always go to Masha. But every meeting was filled with such emotions, such feelings, that she was dizzy with happiness. And I wanted to tell the whole world about it. Once the lovers went for a walk along the shore and there was an attraction. On a special device, a man flew to the top of a 7-story building. "Oh, what a horror!" Masha shrieked when she saw another daredevil flying like a bird. "What's so scary?" laughed Dima. "That's cool, isn't it? Let's try it out. Imagine you're in free flight and the whole world is at your feet, and you can shout out what's closest to your heart for everyone to hear." "No way, I'm scared." "And I'm not," Dima smiled mischievously. "Now I'm going to jump and shout to the whole world that I love you." "Dima, don't do it. I already know. But I want everyone to hear it." And he ran towards the attraction. Masha tried in vain to dissuade him. Dima just laughed. "And now he's flying high. Masha, Masha, I love you." His voice echoes across the embankment, and all the passers-by looking around smile, looking at the boy, at the embarrassed girl, who looks up tensely. "Hey, the boys," the older people sigh. "You still have your whole lives ahead of you." And the young girls look at Masha a little enviously. "What a wonderful guy we've got. No one can be so bold as to shout their feelings to the world." And downstairs, Dima was already kissing Masha hard, and it seemed that their happiness would be endless. How could it be otherwise if it was true love? 3 months later, on New Year's Eve, Dima wanted to introduce Masha to his parents. They had just returned to their villa in Russia. The man thought it was time for them to find out who had captured his heart. He never took the fact that Masha was completely out of his league seriously. What could boundaries be, especially material ones, when he felt he had found his own, the one and only? And he never allowed himself to think that his parents might not accept his choice. They had always supported him, were his pillar of strength. But Masha, who found out about Dima's decision, was afraid of how Dima's parents would accept it. His father is a diplomat, his mother an elegant, beautiful woman. She had seen a photo of them. Suddenly, they wouldn't like a simple orphan girl. "No way," Dima assured her. "I have the most wonderful parents in the world. Everything will be fine, you'll see. Of course they'll be surprised at first, but then they'll understand." "And if they don't understand?" Masha asked anxiously. "And if they don't understand, it won't change anything. We'll still be together." And so, one winter evening, Dima took Masha to her parents' home. Masha got out of the car and froze. How much this house reminded her of the house she had lived in many years ago. The childhood memories were blurred, of course, but Masha remembered the beautiful 2-story house exactly. Large windows, a balcony, a tiled roof. No, it was a different house. But there was one thing in common. It also smelled of prosperity and wealth, and as they walked down the path to the tenant's house, her heart skipped a beat. Trees, shrubs, everything just like theirs. Do you also have roses blooming in summer? She asked Dima enthusiastically. He nodded and pointed to a snow-covered flower bed. It was like that here too, I remember, Masha said sadly. Don't be sad, Button, Dima winked at her. We'll come here often now. Masha didn't answer, but only sighed, as one would wish. Irina Pavlovna and Nikolai Ivanovich knew that their son would be coming with a girl that evening. They were even glad about it. If their son decided to introduce them, it was a serious matter. They had no doubts about Dima's choice. After all, he is a smart boy. What? Our son is a conspirator. Irina laughed as she waited for her son with a guest. Turns out he's been dating that girl for several months, and they were good friends for several years before that. Yes, Dima told me that, Nikolai nodded. I just didn't know who it was. He was so vague about it that I didn't understand either, Irina shrugged. He just said that his chosen one was a very nice girl and that we'd probably like her. I think it's Zhana. Which Zhana? Have you forgotten Zhanishka? That's the daughter of the banker Matviev. They live 2 lots away from us. Oh, Matveeva? I remember there was a girl running around. Then she went somewhere else. Well, she's studying in London. She graduate in a few years. Listen, that's good. And Dima will get an education, and we'll be related to the banker. Collier, that's a wonderful idea. Yes, Dima is our good man. He's the one who befriended her when we were all still living in London. Irina smiled contentedly and frowned a little. Only I don't remember Alona's mother telling Zhana that her daughter had arrived. Zhana must have decided to surprise her too. Lots of people like surprises, Nikolai grunted with satisfaction, the prospect of having a banker as a relative also appealing to him. Soon afterwards, the doorbell rang, and the maid hurried to open it. Dima's parents looked out with interest. The smile quickly disappeared from Irina's face and Nikolai scratched the back of his head in surprise when they saw his son's company. Masha took off her simple down jacket, adjusted the same simple dress and turned around. When she met Irina's gaze, the girl actually flinched. Dmitri's mother gave her a very unfriendly look. Mom, Dad. When Dima saw his parents, he smiled. This is Masha. So, Masha. Irina giggled. Well, come in, Masha. Irina turned away defiantly and walked towards the dining table. She sat down in her seat. Nikolai still greeted the girl, inviting her to the table. Masha felt out of place. Around such luxury, crystal everywhere, mirrors. She had forgotten that people could live like this. Everyone began to eat in silence. Dima tried to speak to his parents, but they only replied with one word and didn't even look at the guest. Dima gave Masha an encouraging wink and said, Don't worry, everything will be fine. The lobsters were served. Irina finally looked at the girl curiously. I wonder how this simpleton will cope with the dish. And Masha had really forgotten how to eat such seafood according to etiquette. Her mother had taught her as a child, but that was so long ago, and such dishes were not served in the orphanage or in the village with the guardians. Moira, salted, and pollock at best. That was all seafood. Dima, recognizing Masha's confusion, immediately told her what to do. He helped her. Irina grinned at the efforts of this impudent girl who dared to come into her house. And tell us, Masha, about yourself, Irina finally said. It's very interesting to know who your parents are, where you live and where you study. Mum, Dima answered for her. Why all this research? I've only just invited Masha over for dinner, haven't I? Let's do all this talking another time. But why not? Irina objected. We need to know who we're inviting to our house. What if our silver spoons disappear later? Don't worry about it. Masha's voice trembled with annoyance and tears came to her eyes. I'm not like that, and I won't take anything away from you. I'm studying for a Schwiz. I live in a student residence. Who are my parents? They died when I was 5 years old. I grew up in an orphanage. In an orphanage? Irina was horrified. Your parents were alcoholics. Dad was a businessman. We also lived in a big and bright house. But after my parents died, everything was taken away from us because we were in debt. So your father was a crook. He pocketed his 5 kopecks and Nikolai, forgetting his diplomatic skills, was already very keen to be related to the banker. And here's some Masha. Papa, Dima exclaimed. This is too much. How can you talk about a person you don't know at all? We say what we want in our own house, Irina answered for him. I never thought I'd have dinner with a seamstress. The son wondered. At that moment, Masha jumped up from the table and ran into the hallway. The girl cried with anger. She had never experienced such humiliation, so much contempt in the eyes of Dima's parents. There, mockery. And why all this? Because she was poor. Dima rushed after her and her parents continued their meal as if nothing had happened. At the gate of their villa, Dima grabbed Masha by the shoulders, hugged her and began to calm her down. The girl cried at the explosion. Why did you call me here? Why did you call me here? You said your parents were good, and here they are. I don't know why they're like this myself. I never thought that, Dima apologized. I thought they always understood and supported me. They never once in my life told me who to be friends with, who to hang out with, and now it's like this. Because you never brought a beggar into your house. Masha remarked bitterly. Don't say things like that. But if it's true. Dima didn't know what to say to Masha. He simply put her in the car and drove her to the hostel, where he stayed with her until the morning. The young man reassured the girl, swore his love for her, promised that no obstacles would prevent them from being together, and Masha believed him. It was their first night of love. Before that, there had only been romantic relationships. You have no regrets, Dima whispered and hugged his lover. I have no regrets, she replied. The main thing is that we love each other and everything else will work itself out. Probably. It will. You'll see, my parents will still have a good time at our wedding. Wedding. Your heart fluttered with joy. Of course they will. We're together and forever, smiled Dima. Just let me finish university first, and you finish your studies, and then we'll get married. And I'll be a doctor, and you'll be the most famous fashion designer in town. No, you'll just be my wife. You'll stay at home and raise our children. I want a boy and a girl, Masha confessed sheepishly. Yes, you will. And the lovers dreamed of the future for a long time, until morning, and then fell asleep in each other's arms. They celebrated the new year together in Dima's apartment, and they didn't need anyone. They had their own little universe. And after the holidays, Masha moved in with Dima. She tried not to think about what his parents would say. Somewhere deep in her mind was the conviction that they would accept her anyway, but such arrogant parents couldn't have such an easy son. When they first met, they were simply confused. Dima was good too. He wanted to surprise them. He should have told them a little about Masha. No, that's right. They will definitely accept their son's choice. A few more months passed. Masha had already finished school and got a job in a clothing factory. Dima was in his 5th year. A little more and he would graduate. During this time, Masha never once doubted Dimitri's sincerity. Yes, he loved her, a simple seamstress. But all this time, Dimitri's parents never came to visit and never called her over. But Masha believed that the ice would melt anyway. It was a warm July evening. Masha sang a nursery rhyme to herself and prepared dinner. Dima said he had gone to see his friends from the university and promised to come back later. Masha didn't let that upset her. It's normal for the darling to want to relax and be with friends sometimes. The doorbell rang, and Masha raised her eyebrows in surprise, which Dima quickly replied to and hurried to open the door without looking at the lock. The smile quickly disappeared from her face when she saw who had come in. Irina Pavlovna. Masha mumbled in confusion. Hello. May I come in? The woman asked in a businesslike manner and, without waiting for an answer, entered the apartment, almost bumping the girl with her shoulder. Yes, of course, mumbled Masha. I'm sorry you dropped by so unexpectedly. I have a cake almost ready. Cake? Irina grimaced. No, I'm going to wrap up for catering. And you, my dear, are advised to do the same. Although, in your case, it's pointless anyway. That is, Irina grinned. You're not going to stop my son with your cakes or your figure. Do you think he's there now? At a meeting with friends. With friends, Irina laughed, but then suddenly stopped talking and said in an icy tone, he's with his favorite woman right now. You've got something mixed up. I'm confused. It's you who's confused. You probably already think that my son's wife. Well, I'll have to prove you wrong. Dima has had a fiancée for a long time. Her name is Jean. When we lived in London, they were dating. Dima confessed to me, and then you came along. Simple and available. And Jean is far away. So my son came to live with you. You see, he has to satisfy his needs. I'm sorry to be so direct, but it's true. Jean came back the other day, and he's in the cafe with her. My poor boy, he doesn't know how to tell you the right thing. And with Jonna, they're getting married in August. After Irina had said all this, she looked at Masha. Her lips were trembling from what she had heard. Tears started to fall. I don't believe you, she said in a trembling voice. You don't believe me? Then see for yourself. They're in an Italian cafe downtown right now. I can drop you off there. Don't do that. Go away. Please. Go away. Honey, this apartment was actually bought with my husband's money, Irina grinned. But I'm not chasing you away now. You can pack your things, but I hope you understand that you have to leave. Irina made her way to the exit. She even waved goodbye to Masha, and Masha sat in the apartment for another 5 minutes, thinking about everything she had just heard. Had Dima lied to her so meanly? Was he just using her? But why all these doubts? We have to go to this cafe. Yes, Irina Pavlovna was right. Masha ran out of the apartment. There was a cab at the entrance. Once there, Masha walked towards the cafe with a heavy heart. She hoped to the last that everything Irina Pavlovna had said was a lie. Dima couldn't do this to her. He loves her. But in the window at the table she saw Dima and a girl Masha didn't know. She's beautiful, you can't say that. She told Dima something, laughed, occasionally touched his arm. He just listened and nodded. When Masha saw this, she thought it was just an acquaintance. But she said they were in a cafe. And then an unknown man came up to her. I'm a doctor, he said briefly. Stand back. The man quickly assessed the situation. It wasn't even minutes, just seconds. He gave Dash artificial respiration. No one had time to say a word. The girl seemed to be breathing. Where's the mom? The man asked. She's in the store, the women replied, confused. The ambulance may not arrive in time. The child needs to go to hospital urgently, the man said quickly and took Dashi in his arms. Where are you taking her? Man, stop it. The women were outraged. Once again, I'm a doctor. And there was no time to wait for the child's mother to make her way to the stores. Here is the address she can come to. The man pressed a business card with the address and phone number of the clinic into one of the women's hands and practically ran to the silver foreign car with the child in his arms. Dasha was still breathing, but somehow heavily, with a tear. None of the mothers even had time to react. They all looked at each other, perplexed. What are they going to tell Masha? Who took her away? Where? Masha shouted when she arrived at the playground 5 minutes later. How could you let that happen? Masha, Dashena has really fallen ill. He said it was only a matter of seconds. Other mothers, who were well aware that something unusual had happened, justified themselves. But you can't just leave your child to a stranger. They were simply confused. The man with his assertiveness, his determination, threw them to the ground. Here's a map. One of them muttered and pressed a cardboard sheet into Masha's hand. Masha read the address and hurried to catch a cab. At the same time, she called the police and said that her child had been abducted. She burst into tears in the cab. My daughter, my sunshine, where are you? How could it happen that a few minutes have turned my life upside down? What if something happens to Dasha? No, Dasha won't survive that. There was indeed a private cardiovascular clinic at the address given. Masha ran up to the receptionist and, confused, began to explain who she was and why she had come to them. Calm down, woman, the pretty receptionist said to her. Everything is fine. We have your child. The head doctor himself is looking after him right now. The baby is being prepared for the operation. For what operation? Masha cried out. A heart operation. I understand your little girl had a cardiac arrest. Good thing our doctor was nearby. An operation. Masha couldn't believe it. I've been pushing for this surgery almost since my daughter was born. I mean, it's chargeable and very expensive. No fraternity wanted it without money. It's not like I have anything to pay you with. What are you thinking now? The receptionist raised her eyebrows sternly. About your daughter's life or the money? God, of course it's about my daughter. It's just all so sudden. Wait in the hall, the girl was already smiling. And believe me, when your daughter is operated on by Dmitry Nikolaevich, everything will be fine. And with money, I think, the question will be solved. Dmitry Nikolaevich is the owner of the clinic. Masha was a little confused when she heard Dmitry Nikolaevich, but she immediately forgot that there are few people with the same name and patronymic among surgeons. The operation lasted several hours. During this time, the police came to the clinic. After learning that the child was in the hospital and the doctors were taking care of the baby, the law enforcers left. However, Masha was told, "Mom, you should take better care of the child." And Masha didn't say anything against it. Yes, she is guilty, but she left her daughter with people she knew for a few minutes. And that's what happened. The main thing is that everything is all right now. At last the doors to the ward opened and a doctor came into the corridor. Masha froze when she saw him. Dima came up to her. "You, Dima?" He also recognized the girl immediately and stopped for a moment. Then he practically ran towards her to perform a quick, hour-long operation. Masha, he couldn't believe his eyes. What is this? A dream? A mirage? "Hello, Dima." Masha almost whispered and lost consciousness. She was already waking up in Dimitri's office. Masha was lying on the sofa and Dima was sitting next to her, looking at her. "What's wrong with my daughter?" she said with difficulty. "There's nothing wrong with the girl. I performed an emergency operation. She will need another operation, but that will be a little later. I understand the girl has a severe deformity. Why didn't you operate straight away?" They said it could be done over time, and it's very expensive. "Expensive," sighed Dimitri. "Oh, those bureaucrats. All right, don't worry. My clinic will treat your daughter free of charge. I just need her papers, because I don't even know the little girl's name. Dasha. Her name is Dasha." Masha looked Dimitri in the eye. "And this is your daughter." When Dimitri heard this, his face changed. He was confused. "Masha," he shrieked, "I don't understand anything. Why have you been silent all these years? Disappeared so suddenly? I was looking for you. What was I supposed to do when your mother told me you were marrying someone else? But it wasn't true. I only had you. Don't lie to me." Masha cried. "I saw you in the cafe." And she told him how she had seen him with someone else many years ago. Dimitri listened and became increasingly gloomy. "And I couldn't understand why this Jean had appeared so suddenly and asked for a meeting. Yes, I lied to you back then that I was going to a friend's house so you wouldn't be offended. Jean called and begged to meet me, then started kissing me in the cafe. Masha, we never had anything with her, neither before you nor after. And when I lived with you, I only loved you. And I love you now. And Jean, I know now that this mother set it all up. She and my father wanted me to marry Jean so much. And you did that. Masha, I'll say it again. I've loved you all these years and I still love you." They looked at each other and then hugged. They sat like that, hugging and silent. How could they part in this way? Because someone else's scheming was going on. Two loving hearts were separated, and suddenly fate brought them together again. Dimitri said that he had been looking for her for a long time after Masha's disappearance. He was in her dormitory, at work, but no one could say anything. Masha had disappeared from the face of the earth. In passing, he saw Polina in the dormitory. When she found out from Dima that Masha had disappeared, she just said reassuringly that the bird had flown away. And after graduating from university, Dimitri went abroad to work as a surgeon. And it was only a few months ago that he returned to Russia, to the clinic he had been running for a few years. He never got married. He has a very strained relationship with his parents. After he categorically refused to marry the banker's daughter, they took great offense at him. It turns out that he and Jean's parents have already agreed on everything and made plans together. And the son refused. After returning home, Dima continued to look for Masha. Neither on social networks, nor at her former place of work could she be found. Dimitri, with his busy schedule, could not go to the place where Masha used to live. And so he took a moment that evening, arrived, walked along the path to the dormitory, remembered his darling, when suddenly he saw a little girl on the playground who urgently needed medical help. He forgot everything and rushed to save the child. And he did. God, I operated on my own daughter and I didn't even know it. Dimitri replied, sighing heavily. Whoever said it could be like this would never have believed it. A daughter. I have a daughter. I'm so grateful that you're suddenly here. Masha confessed. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if you had turned up at a slightly different time. Masha, I don't really believe in miracles, but today I'm ready to believe in them with all my soul. Yes, it is a miracle. Our daughter must have a strong guardian angel. And they sat there for a long time, talking and reminiscing about the past. Moshe talked about Dasha. Dima listened to her every word, a little incredulous that they had met in such an amazing way. But they had. Then the two of them went to Dashina. The girl had already recovered from the anesthetic. "Mommy," the girl whispered, "I fell down and can't remember anything. Am I going to die now?" "What are you, my darling?" Moshe smiled through her tears. "You're going to live now? Long and happy. You'll just be in hospital for a while and then you'll be the healthiest girl in the world." "Will I go to school?" "You will," Dmitri drawled. "As a doctor, I'm telling you. You'll study like everyone else, and even better." Dima asked Moshe not to tell the girl who he was right away. For Dasha, he had to remain a doctor, at least for the duration of the treatment. It was simply necessary to protect the girl, because strong new emotions could affect the child's well-being. A month later, Dasha was operated on again. The operation was performed by another doctor who specialized in the child's pathology. Dima called him from Israel, and the girl recovered very soon. From the clinic, Dasha moved into a new, beautiful house with her mother. The girl could not believe that she would now be living here. "Mom, and this place even has its own kitchen," wondered the girl, who had grown up in a hall-like dormitory where the kitchen and bathroom were shared. "Yes, darling," smiled Masha. "And it's all yours," smiled Dmitri. "And the kitchen, bathroom and your room are separate. And we also have a garden." "And why is it mine?" the girl asked. Dmitri hesitated a little, because they still hadn't told Dasha who he was. "But apparently now is the time, because this house is mine and I'm your dad," he finally admitted. Dasha, a 6-year-old child, frowned, thought for a while and then said, "Dad, you and Mom should get married." The adults looked up and laughed. "We really should. How much longer can we wait?" From the mouth of a child, as they say. And then there was a wedding. Dmitri's colleagues were among the guests. Moshe invited her friends who had supported her all these years, Inna, Natalia and Zoya. "Oh, Moshe, what a beauty you are." Zoya marveled as she looked at Moshe in her wedding dress. "But I've been dreaming all my life and I've never worn a white dress. I'm about to marry off my daughter and I've never been a bride myself." Zoya, laughed Moshe. Even though her friend was 15 years older than her, they always spoke like peers. "I'm sure you'll have everything." "Of course you will, Zoya." Natalia grinned. "I can now use Moshe as an example to say that not all men are bastards. There's Umka, a very good man." "Uh-huh," Inna snorted. "The main thing is that he doesn't belong to an endangered species." And all four of them laughed merrily. Then there was a party. Then the restaurant. The friends took it in turns to look after Dasha, while Moshe and Zima were at the photo shoot. They accepted congratulations and danced. But most of the time the little girl was with her parents. The girl was so excited. Mom got married and she now has a dad, just like the other children. That's great. And her heart doesn't hurt anymore. What happiness that is. But Dima's parents weren't at the wedding. His son hadn't invited them to the ceremony on principle, even though they were in Russia. When Irina Pavlovna found out who her son was going to marry, she threw a tantrum and said that Dima would ruin his whole life. "It is not known from whom else this," as she put it, half-breed descended. And in general, this Masha will show herself. Here is Janushka. Such a good girl, but she was already married. But now she is divorced. "Mom, don't you dare interfere in my life ever again," Dmitri replied to her. "If it weren't for you, Masha, my daughter, wouldn't have had to go through all that she went through. And Dasha's operation would have been done sooner and the little girl wouldn't be in pain. A mongrel, you say? Masha, she's not. She has never offended anyone by word or deed in her life, is always noble in her behavior. But what about you, Mama? Who are you? How do you behave? You talk the way you talk to your mother?" Her father shouted. "Think about what you're saying." "I don't want to talk to you at all," Dmitri replied wearily. "Live as you like, but stay out of my family. I won't let you do that anymore." In short, they fought to the death. Dmitri was naturally a little annoyed that his parents were being dishonest with his favorite wife, but he realized that it was pointless trying to change their minds, and so communication between them broke off. Another 6 months passed. Dmitri was still working in his clinic. Moshe was at home looking after her daughter and the house. They had an au pair, but Maria and she herself did a lot. She didn't like outsiders ironing her laundry or cleaning the bedroom, for example. Masha liked to romp around in the garden. She planted roses, a huge flower bed, and now a little Spitz, a funny white puppy, lived in her house. Just like in her childhood, Masha called him Umka. Dasha loved playing with him, and Masha herself carried the puppy like a child. Every now and then she sat down at the sewing machine and sewed something interesting, then Dasha's outfit, then her own dress. Once she sewed a shirt for Dima. When he tried on his Renault, he couldn't believe that his wife was such a master of a sewing machine. He bought her exactly what Masha asked for, of course, but he couldn't imagine how much his mistress had golden hands. Masha, yes, your shirt is indistinguishable from the branded thing, he enthused, looking at the shirt. Such a party girl you had me? Masha smiled modestly. You know, I'm so bored without a job. I'm so unused to sitting at home. Maybe I can find a job somewhere. The wife of the head doctor at the clinic will be sewing bed linen at the factory. Dima smiled. Well, no. You know what I'm thinking about. Now with money not very much all to invest in the clinic, but in a year things should settle down. Then I can buy you a little studio where you'll be the owner. You can have your own tailor. What do you think of the idea? Dima, I've been dreaming about that for a long time, Masha exclaimed. To have my own studio. That's so great. And she threw her arms around her husband's neck, laughing. But soon news arrived that changed her plans a little. One day, Masha's cell phone rang. Maria Vitolyevna Morozova. A stern male voice asked, Hello, I'm a notary. The man introduced himself and said he had an important message for Masha. Hello, replied Masha, confused. Only I'm not Morozova anymore. What is your request? Could you come to the notary with all your identity papers? The notary suggested. I'll explain the matter to you on the spot. Don't worry, everything is going very well for you. You scare me with some of the secrets. I wouldn't want to do that under any circumstances. Anyway, I'll be waiting for you. And the notary dictated the address. Masha couldn't understand whether it was a joke or the truth. Dasha was at school, Dima was at work. Everything was done. Even lunch was ready. Maybe dictations really do go off. What kind of important message is in there? That's exactly what Masha did. She called a cab and drove to the notary's office. There she was met by a pleasant-looking middle-aged man, Igor Petrovich. He was the one on the phone. He told Masha that she was the heir to a company, an heiress. Masha was surprised. What makes you think that? I don't have anyone. My parents died when I was little. No, you're confusing me with someone else. I've checked everything several times. Igor Petrovich shook his head. There's no possibility of mistaken identity. And he told Masha how, about a year ago, they had arrested a big businessman, started investigating his crime and came across another one more than 20 years earlier. At the time, this businessman was the head of a company owned by Vitaly Morozov, your father. And even back then, Alexei, as the businessman was called, was lawless, transferring money to false accounts and setting up one-day companies. At some point, your father found out and simply wanted to fire him without keeping an eye on what he was doing. He felt sorry for him. Alexei didn't. He was the one who caused the accident that killed your parents. And you miraculously survived. And then Alexei embezzled Vitaly Morozov's company and his entire fortune. How do you know that? Masha asked with tears in her eyes. It was so hard for her to hear all this and even harder to remember the accident itself. The investigators did a good job, Igor Petrovich replied evasively. Alexei himself admitted everything. On the whole, a lot of work has simply been done, and now it turns out that you are the legal heir to the funds that this manager took over from your father back then. That's it. What am I being asked to do? Masha asked, still struggling to comprehend what she had heard. Exactly, nothing. You just have to get hold of the laws. That's why I tracked you down. And that, I have to tell you, was no easy task. I had to visit to orphanages. I traveled to the countryside. Then I looked around in factories. In general, I looked everywhere, and it turned out that you were very close by. Yes, it happened in an amazing way. Masha smiled and then remembered. And how are my former guardians? They're gone now. They've drunk themselves to death. Masha just sighed. Yes, that was her life too. She hadn't been back to this village since she was young. She had nothing to do there anymore, especially since Dima's grandmother, Grandma Valia, was no longer there. She had been gone since she was at school. That was just the way it was. In the evening, she told her husband everything. Dmitri didn't believe the story because he thought his wife was trying to fool someone, and only after studying all the documents from the notary did he agree. Everything looked like the truth. After a while, Masha entered the rights of inheritance, but the young woman had no desire to work in the company, where everything was connected with computer technology. For her it was both difficult and uninteresting. Masha therefore decided to sell her assets, which the other partners were only too happy to do. After receiving a decent sum, Masha was confused. What should she do with this pile of money? She decided to give most of it to her husband to expand the clinic. And Dima, suddenly he was against it. It's not enough that I took money from a woman, even my wife. Masha, have you forgotten your dream of having your own studio? You have enough money for a whole necklace, he said. Of course, I haven't forgotten, but when it's a dream, you seem braver. And when it's please decide, you're scared. I'm confused. Will I be able to do it? Of course you can do it. Oh, there's so much to do. I don't even know where to start. Don't worry, laughed Dima. There are special people who can help you set up a company and sort out all the organizational issues. I'll find them, and you go ahead and figure out the details. For example, have you thought about who you want to employ? I haven't thought about anything yet, but I should probably get the girls. Zoya, Natasha and Ina. They're great seamstresses, aren't they? I think that's the right decision, nodded Dima. You have so many friends that you don't need to be afraid of a crisis. And soon the friends arrived at Masha's house. She helped them settle into the city and rented apartments. The women were a little confused. Perhaps they had gotten involved in this case for nothing. But when Ilya's network started to work and the first jobs started to come in, it became clear that everything was going to turn out well. A year later, the network of Molnia Studios was flourishing. The name Lightning was invented by Masha. Natasha, Zoya, Ina and Zima were puzzled at first. Why is that? No, friend, said Ina. I understand if you call the studio by your own name, your daughter's name, the name of your late mother or father, or even Umka, for example, like your dog. But why Lightning? Do you know what I thought about when I came to the village after my parents died and lived there for many years with guardians who mistreated me? I dreamed that one day lightning would strike, that everything around me would sparkle and disappear like a terrible dream, and that I would finally always be with those I could be happy with. Masha replied with a sad smile. Years have passed, many things have happened and will happen in my life. That's life. But now I'm sure that the worst is behind me. The only people left with me are those whom I can bring joy to and who receive joy from me. And so it goes on. And the lightning continued to grow. The workers' wages were decent. Masha's friends finally even managed to buy apartments. Zoya moved in with her children and even got married. Natalia also found a decent man and no longer claimed that there were no worthy men among the men. It turns out that there are after all. And only Ina is alone. Although, no, not alone. The woman wanted to take in a girl from an orphanage, met with a little girl, takes her home for a weekend. Documents are being prepared. Yes, she will make it. And rich people began to apply to the studio. Everyone wanted one of Maria's outfits. The young woman was invited to various television programs. She was interviewed. Naturally, Masha accepted. Despite her busy schedule, she always found time for her daughter and husband because family still came first for her. One day, her mother-in-law called her. Irina Pavlovna. Masha was surprised. I'm listening to you. Mashenka, her mother-in-law sang in a sweet voice. And here I was reading about your work in a magazine. How good you are. And what good pictures. We haven't seen Dima for a long time. My granddaughter is so beautiful. How old is she already? Soon to be 10. That's amazing. And Grandma hasn't met Grandpa yet. Mashenka, please invite us to your place. Nikolai and I would love to talk to you. Forget all the insults. We are very close. Yes, Irina Pavlovna, you're right. We are close, but I will ask Dima when we can see you. All right, all right. To be honest, Dima was glad that his parents had taken a step forward. It hurt him that they did not want to communicate, and here they had asked for it. Of course, they invited Irina and Nikolai to visit, and they had lobster for dinner. Irina didn't even bat an eyelid, as if she didn't remember how she had made fun of Masha's clumsiness one winter evening many years ago. Now Maria mastered the instruments with ease, and so did Dasha. Irina looked at her granddaughter and realized how much she resembled Dima as a child. Perhaps she had made a mistake, but Irina couldn't tell yet. She couldn't bring herself to do so. Only Dasha smiled. The girl smiled back at her. She couldn't understand where she had been for so long. Her grandparents had disappeared. Our job is so nice, sighed Irina. Grandpa often travels around the world, and I'm sure you want to come with him sometime. No, I don't think so, smiled Masha. Dasha has a lot to do here. She goes to school, attends a dance studio and an art course. What a versatile and well-developed granddaughter we have growing up, Nikolai said proudly. Well done. I am crazy, Dasha replied without false modesty. And I also like reading books about surgery. About surgery? Irina was surprised, and everyone looked at Dasha in amazement. Even the maid, Elena. This was something new. Not even her parents knew about it. Yes, in surgery, Dasha replied. I don't understand much there yet. I mainly look at pictures, but in the future I'll understand everything, because I want to be a doctor like Dad. That's exactly it. Masha laughed. And why not a fashion designer like Mum? Oh, Mum, I don't like drawing. And what about the drawing course? Nikolai didn't understand. Yes, I go there because a boy I really like goes there, the girl admitted. And they all laughed amicably. And after dinner, when they had said goodbye to their parents, Masha and Dima sat in the living room and talked for a long time. I wonder whether it will be possible to build a relationship with Irina and Nikolai this time. Dima is very hopeful. Masha still has doubts. Nothing. Time will tell.